If you believe Rath, and again, I have trouble believing Rath, but if you believe him when he says he's lined up a $500 billion line of credit with the United States, well, what's the collateral on that? Well, it's the oil sands. How can you declare your independence of the United States if you're relying on the United?
As you can see behind me, there are hundreds of people lined up to sign a petition. What's the question? Should Alberta separate from the rest of Canada?
Hundreds of people have lined up across Alberta to sign a petition centered on one question. Should Alberta separate from the rest of Canada? In city after city, people have been standing in long lines, sometimes waiting for hours, just to add their names to a document that could change the future of the province. The petition needs 178,000 verified signatures by May the 2nd.
It needs to be strong and free from the shackles of the Liberal government. We are tired. We don't matter in this relationship, and it has to stop. I think we've had...
My understanding is that we had well over 10,000 people, go through the line in Edmonton this weekend. We had 5,000 people in Okotoks. I mean, those are just the two events I was focused on. There were events all over the province.
In order to trigger a provincial referendum on the issue. That number is not just symbolic. It is the official threshold required under Alberta's election laws. In places like Red Deer, Calgary, and many small towns throughout Alberta, large crowds have gathered.
So if you don't know, Alberta in particular, it's not just another Canadian province. It's an economic superpower. I mean, with a GDP of nearly $340 billion, Alberta single-handedly generates 14% of Canada's entire economic output, while housing only 11% of its population.
It's worth it. I'd rather stand in line for 4 hours than live under Liberal government for 5 years, so.
That's facts. I don't like the Liberal.
Some events have looked more like rallies than simple signature drives, with families, seniors, and young adults all showing up to take part. The effort is being led by the Stay Free Alberta campaign, the organization responsible for organizing and running the signature collection process.
And we've seen what this can do politically when, this type of emotion is not channeled towards something more productive like a vote. We saw it during COVID. We've seen it during other sort of protest events in the last few years.
Their goal is simple but significant. They want to give Albertans the chance to vote directly on a clear and direct question.
Believe him when he says he's lined up a $500 billion line of credit with the United States. Well, what's the collateral on that? Well, it's the oil sands. How can you declare your independence of the United States?
And I hope that the federal government takes that seriously.
Smith believes separatist sentiments were created by Ottawa. She argues it's up to the federal government to fix it, pitching proposals like coast-to-coast oil and gas shipping.
The exact wording they hope to place on a provincial referendum ballot is, "Do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state?" That question leaves little room for confusion. It asks voters to decide whether Alberta should remain in Canada or move forward as its own independent country.
We have to work even harder because we're too busy paying all of our taxes out east and we get nothing back in return. And the people here have to work extremely hard to pay their rent, to pay their gas bills, to buy their food, and I think enough is...
Alberta's energy sector alone contributes over $70 billion to Canada's GDP. Without Alberta, the federal government in Ottawa would face a near $20 billion shortfall every single year. Alberta is the golden goose of the Great White North.
The petition has been approved by Elections Alberta, which means it is not just a symbolic protest. It carries official legal status within the province's electoral system. Because it is formally approved, once the required number of verified signatures is collected within the rules, the provincial government cannot simply ignore it. The law requires that the process move forward.
And that has led to, significant political change here in Alberta. So this is probably the most effective way of channeling that energy into something, and we'll see if this gets on the ballot later this year.
The petition window officially opened on January 3rd and will close on May 2nd.
Very dangerous game that separatists are playing, and they're really causing a major national security crisis, not just for Alberta, but for all of Canada. And I hope that sanity prevails.
The province of Alberta should cease to be a part of Canada to become an independent state.
That's the question that they're hoping for. The push comes as new polling.
That gives organizers exactly 120 days to gather the necessary signatures. The required number is set at 177,732 verified names. Each signature must be checked and confirmed to ensure it belongs to an eligible Alberta voter.
Trump wanting to make Alberta the 51st state. It has to do with the fact that Canada has basically become a communist country controlled by communists.
The Stay Free Alberta campaign is collecting signatures for the chance to vote on the question. What we also have pictures of is these long lines of people waiting to sign. 178,000 signatures by May 2nd to trigger a provincial referendum.
If the campaign reaches that number within the 120-day period, it will formally trigger action inside the political system. That would place the question of Alberta's independence on a path toward a provincial referendum, allowing voters across the province to make the final decision at the ballot box.
Not your enemy. We've actually done a lot for you guys, so now we're just going to do it alone. We could actually prosper for the first time in years without having to run through Ottawa's red tape, which we're sick of.
Even if the campaign were to fall short of the required number, supporters argue that the size of the turnout already shows there is real and growing frustration among a portion of the population. The attempt itself reflects the level of pressure that exists beneath Alberta's political landscape. Support for Alberta sovereignty has been rising.
Change for my kids. I don't want them to carry all the debt that's going to happen by keeping in what we have right now.
According to recent polling, current surveys suggest that between 20 and 29% of the provincial population supports the idea of independence. While that does not represent a majority, it is still a significant portion of the population. When the numbers are broken down by age group, the picture changes even more.
We're confident that we're going to achieve our goal. We're going to shatter our goal of 177,000 signatures, and we're trying to do everything we can to get well over 1 million signatures before the 120 days is up. So.
Already got over 2,000 canvassers, so we're gunning for a lot more. So I think that's going to be super. I think this is a true grassroots movement.
Among Albertans between 18 and 34 years old, support for independence rises to nearly 40%. That suggests younger voters may be more open to the idea than older generations. Polling also shows that when people are asked whether they would support independence,
the federal government doesn't seem to be interested in working with Alberta, and it's unfortunate. But you know what? We have a choice to make, whether we continue the status quo or we're going to...
If Alberta were allowed to keep equalization money within the province instead of sending it to the federal government, support jumps above 50%. That question connects directly to concerns about money, taxes, and the way wealth is shared between provinces. On the ground, the signature collection events have drawn impressive turnout. In Edmonton alone, more than 10,000 people reportedly passed through the line during a single weekend event.
The government is talking about export tariffs on Alberta oil and gas, or export bans on Alberta oil and gas. They're the ones who say that nothing's off the table. Well, we're the ones who are saying then if that's not off the table, then the 51st state is not off the table.
In Okotoks, about 5,000 people attended to sign. Events have not been limited to major cities. They have taken place across rural communities and smaller towns at the same time, creating a province-wide effort. The Stay Free Alberta campaign says it currently has more than 2,000 canvassers working across Alberta to gather signatures. These volunteers and organizers are stationed in public spaces, community halls, and organized events, making it easier for residents to participate. The campaign has publicly stated that it hopes to collect more than 1 million signatures before the May 2nd deadline. That goal is far above the minimum legal requirement of 177,732. Organizers have expressed confidence that they will easily pass the official threshold and possibly reach numbers far beyond it. The center of the independence debate is Alberta's financial relationship with the rest of Canada. Alberta's energy sector plays a major role in the country's economy. The sector contributes more than $70 billion every year to Canada's overall GDP. Without Alberta's contribution, the federal government in Ottawa could face an estimated annual shortfall of close to $20 billion. Since 2007, Alberta has sent approximately $244 billion more to the federal government than it has received back. That equals about $16 billion each year flowing out of the province into federal programs and services. When broken down per person, that means roughly $3,800 per Albertan per year leaves the province and goes to Ottawa. Supporters of independence argue that this financial imbalance is unfair and places too much burden on Alberta taxpayers. Alberta has not received equalization payments since the 1960s. Equalization is a federal program designed to redistribute wealth among provinces so that public services can remain relatively equal across the country. While Alberta has not received money from this program in decades, it has continued to contribute to it. As one of the strongest economies in the country, Alberta has consistently been a net contributor. For many independence supporters, this long history of contributing without receiving payments back is a central point of frustration. They believe Alberta's wealth should stay within the province rather than being redistributed elsewhere. The province's overall economic footprint is substantial. Alberta's GDP sits near $340 billion. The province generates around 14 to 17% of Canada's total economic output, while containing only about 11% of the country's population. Beneath Alberta's land are approximately 70 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. Current production stands at about 3.7 million barrels per day. Energy makes up roughly 28% of Alberta's total provincial economy, making it the backbone of its financial strength. Almost all of Alberta's crude oil exports, about 97%, go directly to the United States. This strong trade connection with the U.S. is often mentioned by those who argue Alberta could stand on its own economically. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has become a symbol of tension between Alberta and the federal government. In 2018, Ottawa purchased the pipeline for $4.5 billion. The purchase was presented as a move to protect Alberta's ability to export energy. However, after the purchase, the project faced years of regulatory reviews, legal challenges, and repeated delays. Approvals were granted and later reversed, followed by additional studies and court decisions. Over time, the total cost of the project grew dramatically. What began as a $4.5 billion purchase eventually rose to more than $30 billion. For many Albertans, this large cost increase represents deeper issues within federal decision-making and energy policy. If Alberta were to separate from Canada, the economic impact would not be limited to the province alone. Alberta represents roughly 17% of Canada's GDP. Economic models suggest that if Alberta left the Federation, the Canadian dollar could fall by 15 to 20% in value. The equalization program would immediately lose around $16 billion per year in contributions. Credit rating agencies might review and possibly lower Canada's national credit rating. Without Alberta's tax base, Canada's overall debt-to-GDP ratio would rise significantly. These changes could affect interest rates, borrowing costs, and the broader national economy. At the same time, Alberta is deeply connected to the rest of the country. Trade routes and transportation corridors link provinces together. British Columbia depends on routes that pass through Alberta to move goods and maintain trade flows. Central Canada benefits from Western access to international markets that connect through Alberta's infrastructure. The economic relationship works in multiple directions. That means a separation would create ripple effects throughout the entire country. Every province would feel the impact in different ways, whether through trade, currency value, federal funding, or market confidence. The debate over Alberta's future is not just about numbers. It is about identity, fairness, and political direction. Some see independence as a path to greater control over resources, taxation, and laws. Others believe remaining within Canada provides stability, shared strength, and national unity. The petition process now underway represents one of the most direct democratic tools available to Albertans. If enough verified signatures are gathered before May 2nd, the province could face one of the most important political decisions in its history. The outcome, whatever it may be, would shape not only Alberta's future, but also the future of Canada as a whole. Premier Smith has argued that separatist sentiments in Alberta were directly created by decisions and policies coming out of Ottawa. She has said many times that the frustration people feel in Alberta did not appear out of nowhere, but instead grew over years of federal policies that, in her view, have limited Alberta's energy industry and economic freedom. According to her, when people in Alberta talk about separation, they are reacting to what they see as unfair treatment from the federal government. She believes that if Ottawa wants to lower the temperature and reduce support for independence, then Ottawa must take responsibility for the policies that caused the anger in the first place. In her speeches and interviews, she has pointed to federal environmental rules, pipeline delays, and regulatory barriers as examples of decisions that have hurt Alberta's main industries. She has further argued that it is therefore up to the federal government to address the grievances driving those sentiments. In her view, Alberta alone cannot solve the issue because many of the complaints are tied directly to federal laws and national policy decisions. Premier Smith has specifically pitched proposals aimed at easing these tensions. One of her main ideas has been to push for coast-to-coast oil and gas shipping access. She has described this as a practical and realistic policy change that would allow Alberta's energy products to reach more global markets. Most of Alberta's oil exports go to the United States. By expanding shipping access across Canada's coasts, Alberta could send its oil and gas to Europe and Asia more easily. She argues that this would strengthen Alberta's economy, create jobs, increase revenues, and reduce dependence on a single customer. The federal government, however, has signaled that it is willing to consider strong measures when it comes to Alberta's energy exports. Federal officials have raised the possibility of placing export tariffs on Alberta oil and gas. An export tariff would mean adding an extra cost to energy products leaving the country. There has also been discussion about the idea of export bans, which would restrict or even stop certain energy exports altogether. Federal representatives have stated publicly that nothing is off the table when it comes to potential actions involving Alberta's energy sector. This phrase, "nothing is off the table," has been repeated in interviews and public comments. And it has caught the attention of many people in Alberta who see it as a serious warning. In response to the federal government's statements that nothing is off the table regarding export tariffs and bans on Alberta energy, some Alberta voices have answered with a strong message of their own. They have said that if Ottawa is willing to consider tariffs and bans, then the conversation about Alberta becoming the 51st state of the United States is equally not off the table. This idea, once considered extreme or unlikely, is now being openly discussed in certain circles. Supporters of this concept argue that Alberta already sends most of its oil to the United States and has strong economic ties there. They also point out that Canada and the United States already share deep trade relationships and defense partnerships. The 51st state conversation has been discussed in practical terms as well as political ones. On a purely logistical level, joining the United States would mean entering a $27 trillion economy. Supporters say this could eliminate trade barriers between Alberta and American markets. It could also mean representation in the United States Congress, giving Alberta elected voices in Washington. In addition, Alberta would become part of the American defense system, which is the largest and most powerful in the world. While many questions remain about how such a move would actually work in practice, the fact that the idea is being discussed at all shows how serious the debate has become for some people. History shows that when regions vote on questions about separation or national identity, public interest rises sharply. When Quebec held its sovereignty referendum in 1995, voter turnout was extremely high. People across the province understood that the decision would shape their future in a fundamental way. The same pattern was seen in Scotland during its independence referendum in 2014. In both cases, turnout levels were far higher than in normal elections. Citizens who might not normally vote felt that the stakes were too important to ignore. These examples are often mentioned in Alberta discussions as proof that if a referendum happens, public participation would likely be intense and widespread. The 120-day petition window keeps the issue of Alberta independence firmly in public view. For 4 full months, the topic remains at the center of conversations in communities, media coverage, and political debate. Because the petition is officially recognized, institutions across the country must pay attention to it. The process cannot simply be brushed aside. Every signature collected is part of a legal framework that could lead to a province-wide vote. This constant attention keeps the question alive and ensures that it remains part of daily political discussion. Supporters describe the signature campaign as a genuine grassroots movement, point to the more than 2,000 canvassers working across Alberta as evidence that the effort is not limited to a small group of political insiders. Events have been organized in major cities as well as in smaller towns, showing support across different types of communities. Volunteers stand in public areas, speak with residents, and explain the petition process face to face. The campaign's organizers say their immediate goal is clear: to gather enough verified signatures to formally place the independence question on a provincial ballot later this year. They view this petition drive as the concrete and necessary next step toward giving Albertans a direct say in deciding their political future.